Hello everybody, it is Nicole from iiKiui and welcome back to my elemental series. Today we are going to be redoing the water elemental, so let's go ahead and get started. So as some of you may know, my last water elemental, it was a half body of a girl in a purple swimsuit with water hair, and this was done at least 2 years ago. So my style has definitely changed and the concept that I wanted to portray has definitely changed as well. So as you can see, she is a mermaid, and the reason why I did this was because on one of my elemental videos, I'm not sure which one, someone suggested that the water elemental be a mermaid, and I thought that was actually pretty fitting considering mermaids live in the water. Plus being part fish would make sense in a water elemental, so I decided to include that. So the idea that I have is basically she's a mermaid and her hair is kind of like a waterfall. And this waterfall has created this puddle underneath her, but the puddle is not an ordinary puddle, it is kind of like a portal to the coral reef or something in the ocean. So her water hair is almost like the ocean itself. Hopefully that makes sense, but I just wanted to incorporate the life that lived under the ocean as well as making her a part fish, so she is incorporated into it, and I suppose she is also part waterfall. So I first start with her skin, and it is just a very light blue, and I chose a light blue because I wanted her hair to be darker, and I did a color scheme beforehand so I knew what colors I wanted to do, but her tail was also going to be a dark blue, so in order to contrast that, I made her skin light blue. As for her tail, I decided to go for an orange yellow. Originally, I was going to do a very generic mermaid tail, but I decided to go a little bit different and research some different fin types for fishes, and I went for a betta fish because they have very beautiful fins. I actually had a betta fish growing up and his name was Spark, and my sister had one and his name was Spike. So we had Spark and Spike, and then my parents had two of them, but we didn't really name them. But they were both blue, so my first thought was to make that fin blue. However, it really blended in with the rest of her color scheme, so I decided to go for a peachy orange yellow, and I looked up some betta fish that are those colors, and it's very surprising. I've never seen those before. I've only seen the blue or red ones. So it was very cool to see that, and I used that as the main color palette. So I did a yellow, orange, and blue kind of color palette, not only because they are complementary, but also because it felt very tropical. Now for her hair, I used the Arteza watercolor pencils, and I did a review on this on my channel not too long ago. If you guys are curious, I'll leave a link to that down below and also in the little eye in the corner. But the main challenge that I found when using these, since I haven't used these in an elemental before, was that they didn't have the correct blue that I wanted. Of course, I don't blame them for it because they wouldn't possibly know what blue I would want. So I ended up using two different blues, and I incorporated it with some watercolors to get the right color. So for the leg part of the tail, I wanted it to be really dark, but when I first did it, it was really light and was almost lighter than the hair, which was not the intention. If you go on the behind the scenes, you'll see the color scheme that I did for this image digitally, and you'll see that the tail is significantly darker than the hair so that there was enough contrast. The tail definitely took a lot of fiddling with, but I ultimately ended up using a different color, which was a dark teal, to get that dark color that I wanted. I also used a Color It pen to make the parts that were in shadow darker and just to help with that gradation. And since the pen that I used from the Color It set was a blue, it helped kind of tie it together because the paint that I ultimately used for the tail was actually a dark teal. So for her fins on her arms and on the back of her leg area, and for her shells, I incorporated the same peachy color to yellow to white to make it almost like a sheen, but still keeping the colors in there. And to get that more peachy orange color, I used a Color It pen as well in the skin tone that they have. So here I start adding in the colors in the ocean puddle, and I knew that I wanted the coral to stick out, so it had to be vibrant and bright. But the rest of it I knew was going to be kind of washed out when I put a blue overlay to make it look like it was under the water. But I still wanted to have some color in it to show that it wasn't just all dark blues and grays. So we have some fish in there that are orange. They look like goldfish, but they're not supposed to be. And then there's some seaweed or kelp and sea cucumbers, starfish, and just more coral. This was definitely challenging because I'm not very good at backgrounds, and this I wouldn't consider a background, but it's a step towards it in the right direction. Because all my elementals, I'm trying to incorporate more elements to it. Instead of just having the person there, it would incorporate more things in the environment as well. So like the fire elemental, I put lava rocks. This one I wanted to put part of the ocean, although not the entire ocean. It is part ocean in the puddle. And these are just things that I'm doing to try to improve in my artwork, because I would not use a lot of reference in the past since I thought that I knew what things look like, but you know, when you look at something again and you compare it to a reference, you realize how off you are, and that is something that I did often. So now I use more reference to try and study things, and I think that's the only way that I can actually start improving instead of thinking that I can do it without learning from something else. So anyways, I got off topic. But basically, after I do all the coloring under the puddle, I went over it in a light blue, and there are sections that I left without the blue, such as the coral that sticks out, and then the rock on the far right is sticking out a little bit. So I decided not to go over that in the blue so that they would stay vibrant and it will kind of show that difference between under the water and over the water. So one challenge that I faced was her hair. And the reason why I say this is because it got too dark at a certain point, and I think it was after the colored pencils I started adding more because it was too light before, and it got to a point where it was too dark. And I didn't want to keep adding more, but I ended up doing that anyways. And I added a dark teal marker, and that one kind of did it because it kind of made it so dark I could not go back. I thought that it would just darken the areas that I wanted to be darker, but it actually ended up making it too dark where I couldn't go back and make it lighter because it ended up being darker than her tail, which was not the intent. However, I did like that there was a contrast to it, and it helped define the depth of the water. And I also used a light blue marker on her skin to give it more dimension and just add shadows. Since I did this in the last video, I thought that it was pretty useful, and it also helps with the watercolor process because in watercolors it kind of takes a while for me to build up, and it sometimes gets out of hand, as in it like spreads to the wrong places, and you have to go over the entire thing to make sure it doesn't leave a distinct line between the two. So markers was kind of this compromise that I found that I liked how it turned out. So one of the last few things that I did was I outlined it in black pen, and I'm using the same fine liners that I have been for a while, which are the Artline fine liners, and I used the even set. I think for my style personally, outlining it helps tie it all together because I do kind of color messy. It doesn't leave distinct lines, but it does help to see the contrast between the two colors and just the overall color scheme without any black lines. But I do like having a defined line in my drawings. So for the main mermaid, I used a 0.4 for most of it and then just a 0.2 on her face. But I decided for underneath the puddle, I didn't want it to be as thick of a black, so I decided to use a 0.05, which is the thinnest pen that I could find. And this way they are still defined, but they also are not as loud, I guess, and they still are in the background. I also use color pens for the coral and then the outside of the puddle. Originally, I was thinking of doing colored outlines for the entire puddle, but I thought that it would be too much, so I ended up going with that thin pen. And then I added white in the parts that needed it, so I wanted to add ripples in the puddle by her waterfall hair and then some shine in her hair. And I'm sorry if you can hear Tofu running back and forth in a cat tunnel. Okay, actually it's Tomi. But anyways, after the white, I went for the last thing that I added in the last one, which was the gold. And I'm thinking of doing the gold in all of them just to kind of tie them together. Originally her scales were supposed to be white and pink, but I went for the gold instead because you couldn't really see the white against her light blue skin. So the gold really stood out and it really made it more magical. I also added the gold in her waterfall hair because I've been gold panning before and you can find little gold pieces in the water, so I wanted to incorporate that in some way. And that about wraps up the water elemental. So I hope you guys enjoyed it and like how she turned out. I know I like how she turned out even though there were a few mishaps along the way. And although she didn't turn out exactly as I had imagined, I think that I've learned a lot from this experience and I will take it on to the next one. Also, as a side note, I will probably be doing 2 elementals a month and I might throw in a beautiful disaster soon. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you guys want to see the sketches and the materials, you can go ahead and look at the behind the scenes, which I'll link down below and put in the little eye. So with that, I want to thank you guys so much for joining me today. Keep drawing, keep painting, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!